thanks. My name is Bruce. I wanted to go ahead and welcome Stella and Adam here. They're going to be talking about digital autobiographical reflexivity. Boy, that's a tough one to go ahead and say. So I'll go to, and I'll turn my camera off and I'll hand it off to you two. Go for it. And I'll just mention, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stella Mijeong. And before moving on the session, Adam and I wonder about your thought on reflexivity or reflection. So it's very simple. Just grab your phone and go to www.menti.com and enter the code number 23687135 and then respond the question. I will give 2 minutes. All right, shall we check the result? Beautiful. Oh, somebody put adaptability. Interesting. Who did put this? Can you share your thought or just type in the chat box? Confession. Lovely.
It was me. It was Miranda. Yeah. I put
all right, Miranda. Yeah. Can you share your thought with us?
Well, I just reflection. When you are silent and when you allow yourself to have a moment to be conscious, what I really wanted to put in was consciousness. But being able to be in a conscious state of mind where you can make quick changes on the spot, like when you're running a conference like this, for example.
Yes,
yes. You have to adapt. You have to adapt very quickly, and you have to be in the moment for all of those. Yes.
Yeah. Brilliant, Miranda. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, I do agree. I completely agree that adaptability is also highly related to reflexivity, and others is self. Somebody put the self. I'm interested in this, Tom. Why did you put this, Tom, self? Could you share your idea with us?
Honestly, I was just going off.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Reflection, honestly, and I just think of self-reflection, so I just put self.
No, it's really important, Tom, in terms of reflexivity. Then I will explain why it's important, Tom, later on. You're a genius.
Oh, perfect. That's what I wanted to hear.
All right. So, so now we are moving on the Lear session. So I will share our presentation again. Sorry, Adam.
Well, thank you for those contributions. And as Stella said, a warm welcome from London. I'm sitting in a very warm evening here in Shepherd's Bush, West London. It's just about a week, actually, till the summer solstice. So we're delighted to be with you. And we both are working at UCL. And Stella did want to pay tribute to a very learned professor, Hugh Starkey, who's been very involved with both of us, actually, and issues to do with citizenship. So she's dedicating this talk to him. Yeah. We're engaging on Twitter, as you can see there. Our Twitter handles are there. And also we've put the live Twitter feeds down if you want to refer to those at any point. Now, as Bruce said, it's quite a mouthful, our title. But anyway, it's Digital Autobiographical Reflexivity, a collaborative social learning design strategy in UK higher education. That involves a lot of things, but essentially, thinking about the Learning Ideas Conference, we're trying to think of new ways of reimagining both theory and practice. And we've put that into practice during the pandemic with a group that we've been working with. And we've written a paper, and we'll talk about that later on. But we're in essence going to pull out some aspects from that. So let's just go straight on to the next slide then, if we can, Stella.
Yep.
Right, this is me. I'm Adam Peter Lang. I'm a former history and citizenship teacher in London. And for over 30 years, and for many years of that, I was also a school leader. I was a head teacher, a principal in a London secondary school. These were very diverse London schools with different backgrounds, great schools to work in. You now find me working at UCL. I'm a research scholar. I'll tell you a little bit about my research in a minute, but I'm also involved in various citizenship programs with Stella and others. I'm also involved in a number of initiatives with organisations such as BERA and the Dialogue Society. I'm an education leadership consultant, and I'm engaged with some national and international projects. And I write and comment in this country on the media, generally, in the press and so on. So that's me in a nutshell, right? Now, language is very important to any presentation and to ours. And we think so much power in language. And in our project, that came through very strongly. So sitting here in West London, I just wanted to share with you a couple of things how language can be misconstrued. In the UK or in England or in London, if you say I might join you later, so I might join this session later, means you're not coming, okay? And if you get a minute, somebody says that to you over here, it means do it now. So I just put up a couple of those just to see the nuances of language, but also our project has been very interdisciplinary and across the world, different cultures. And I think that importance of language is so important in any work, and particularly ours. So moving on. Particularly wanted to pay tribute to Jeremy Bentham, who's the spiritual founder of UCL. We're both from UCL. I'm sure you've heard of him, philosopher, social reformer, and so on. In fact, his head, not this head, because that's a wax one, his real head was on a trip to America not that long ago, just before the pandemic, and got safely back, I believe, to UCL. But the reason I'm using him is, one, to talk about philosophy and about thinking, but also to think about positionality in work that we do. And we were very conscious of that in our work. I mean, I'm white, male, middle class of a certain age, and I think it's very important to discuss positionality and to make sure that we're not dominated by certain streams of thought and certain types of thought. So that's why we got Jeremy Bentham there, okay? And then let me just tell you a little bit about the Great Plague. Now, this is a picture of the plague in London. In the heart of the pandemic, when we were working as a group, I returned to look at a book by Daniel Defoe to see what he could tell us in his Journal of the Plague Year of this time. And London lost a quarter of its population during this plague. The rich fled from town to their country homes. So what's different? Other citizens took up refuge in churches or blockaded themselves in their homes. And there was a cry, "Lord, have mercy on London," was cried out. So I was thinking, what would I be doing during the pandemic? Which was a year ago, really. It really affected us with our group. I stayed in London, self-isolating, taking my daily exercise, going out for a daily cycle ride, taking photographs and chronicling a small part of how the pandemic was affecting this part of West London and me personally. So that's where we came from. Good. Next slide, please. Now, I just wanted to tell you just briefly about my research. I do a lot of work in education and citizenship. I'm looking at this project to do with counter-terrorism. I'm looking at this duty, which is called the Prevent duty. It's very controversial. It's very sensitive. It's been in existence in this country for 5 years. And I've been looking at that poster there, which is actually taken from my local tube station. It can be seen there even today. See it, say it, sorted. But look at the imagery around that. Very powerful, strong, emotive imagery about us and them. And I was wanting to get to the bottom of this about policy enactment, and particularly what school leaders felt about this policy, how they perceived it and how they'd basically put it into practice, how they'd enacted it in these very troubling times, really. Rise of populism, muscular liberalism, illiberal liberalism, and various age of anger, and so on and so forth. So that is some of my research, but I'm not going to dwell on that too much today, but just to tell you that that is an area of expertise, I suppose, that I have. So moving on.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for your contribution. So it's my turn. Hi, everyone. I'm Stella Mijong. I'm a human rights education scholar and educational technologist. I'm currently working on biographical research of peace-building citizenship education in the context of Korean reunification. Well, how many people have heard or known about a Korean War or division system? But after the Korean War, the territorial division caused the region division or civic identity division and ideological division between communist North and capitalist South. And the research aimed to build on commitment to democracy and humanitarian ideal to overcome this division habitus. Regarding citizenship, regarding the civic identity division, there is ambivalent aspect. One is division habitus, what I call conflict civic identity. The division habitus is formed by division system, which place the complexity of interrelations among the world system, the Cold War system, and North-South Korea system. As a result, people on both sides developed the division habitus that sees Koreans from the other side as inferior, enemies, and untrustworthy. But at the same time, they developed the unity habitus, what I call the peace civic identity, based on the citizenship education, based on the democracy and humanitarian ideal, so-called 홍익인간 ideology. So these studies focus on transform the civic identity. Especially, I looked at North Korean migrant life trajectory from North Korea and China, the third countries such as Thailand and South Korea and England, by using biographical narrative interview and digital autobiographical writing method. The drawing from this unique migration and adaptation experience, I've developed the peace building capacity creation model. And there are 7 core components of peace building capacity in the center of this model. And also I discovered the 4 main adaptation strategy. This is my doctoral research. Now I'm gonna move on the main presentation, main topic of this session. So now I'm going to tell about the digital autobiographical reflexivity, and my colleague Adam will demonstrate our story on citizenship education. And lastly, we will discuss. All right, let's move on the next bit. As Adam mentioned earlier, the tragic story of the Great Plague in London of 17th century bears a sad similarity to the COVID pandemic at the moment. The term like curfew, quarantine, lockdown, and border closure that were considered distant practice of exceptional situation became suddenly part of our life. The difference is that on this day, person-to-person interaction has been severely replaced with a digital platform. Usual social routines that contribute to the critical process of socialization were substituted with interaction with people in cyber world. This pandemic is a stress testing everything from the global economy to the education system, but also provide an opportunity to learn and change as we rebuild. It allows us to reconsider the citizenship education as tools that provide a global ethical framework to live by for all people in the world, and how foster new citizens who have the capacity to build a more just, resilient, and compassionate society. In our research, call these new citizens active and compassionate citizens who are empowered to tackle hate and prejudice and feel compelled to be upstanders that support those in need. In this part, I will address what digital autobiographical reflexivity is and its features, and how it is utilized to conceptualize the education for active and compassionate citizenship. Finally, I will conclude by talking about the relevance of digital autobiographical approach to social learning design strategy and implication for developing technology-enhanced curriculum based on the case of the UCL. Well, what does it mean, the reflexivity? We already practiced, we responded each other, we shared our idea. But there are many concepts, many definitions. For example, John Van Manen called a confessional tale, and Luz Behar said vulnerable observer. But in this session, I'd like to introduce the leading scholars, Margaret Archer's definition. The reflexivity in research can be defined as the use of critical, self-aware lens to interrogate both the research process and our interpretation of participant lives in our social world. Then what does it mean, the digital autobiographical reflexivity? Basically, the digital autobiographical reflexivity originates from the sociological autobiography. Normally, individuals tell their history within the larger history of their time. So autobiographies allow us to analyze and interpret comprehensive patterns of social phenomena, and at the same time, particularity of subject experiential world through emotional reflexivity. That's why as someone pointed out, is sense of self is the crucial concept of reflexivity. But some scholars have ignored the many complex ways that humans attempt to make their lives meaningful to others. But nowadays, digital life writing operations are beginning to change how we understand our thinking about security or citizenship and identity itself. By creating, sharing people's personal stories, the citizen can engage in civic participation as a citizen curators. Because of this, there are key features of digital autobiographical approach. First of all, by engaging in personal and collective critique and self-reflection, we developed our personal practice and knowledge by rooting our pedagogy within personal knowledge and experience that Pierre Bourdieu called epistemic reflexivity. And more broadly, autobiographical reflexivity allows participants to retrospectively recall the past life of the participant lives and visualize their feeling through the emotional reflection. That's why it is considered as a self-therapy or self-analysis. Of course, it helps us convey some truths about an authentic self. And additionally, the new media enable people to consistently display, construct, shape, and reshape different sense of self through linguistic means. These linguistic modes include more than language, that is imagery or video, sound, or even gesture. Given the use of various multimodality, the the use of term affordance in multimodality is consistent with meaning potential. So the richer the multimodal affordance, the more diverse story can be created by orchestrating a range of multimodal resources. So now I'm gonna moving on the next bit. In terms of research teaching approach, so when we designed the module, our module, we've considered how to connect research, teaching, and learning effectively. And we've chosen the research-based approach because this enables us to focus more on undertaking inquiry-based learning. So we developed digital autobiographical writing platform using Google Doc, and we kept writing reflexive journal, and we did semi-structured online discussion, and finally we discussed with a guest lecture. Well, to conclude, I'd like to share my thought on social learning design strategy. We all know that human beings are born in relationship. Through interaction and agency, we create knowledge and relationship, and we reinvent our culture. But as I told you earlier, the social interactions were deeply affected by the COVID pandemic. Almost all social interactions are happening in the cyberspace. My colleague Camille, she sophisticatedly described her emotion in her autobiographical vignette. We eat differently, we mourn differently. Many of us think differently. We love at a distance. Our eyes have opened to the things we didn't want to see, yet many of us knew. Indeed, our interaction has dramatically changed. So, social learning design strategy need a different approach than in the past. In other words, we need to interact with each other in cyberspace, but we need to help each other share emotions and reflections in greater depth. And throughout this study, the digital autobiographical approach proved to be a great way to exchange in-depth thought and emotions among each participant by responding the challenges such as high degree of reflexivity through the communication or reflection or negotiation. We could formulate the concept of active and compassionate citizenship. Furthermore, the reflexivity can be understood as a cognitive ability that leads to conscious and intentional behavior through critical reflection. Therefore, reflexivity needs to be developed through well-designed technology-enhanced curriculum related to the social learning situation like other cognitive competence. Now I'm going to show the UCL connected curriculum framework. There is a 6 component. The all components associated with some learning or teaching activity to connect with a researcher or the environment inside or outside, and the technology or the situation. So for example, since the last year, almost all modules have replaced online module. So learning analytics provide feedback, the summative feedback to the faculty member and student, and also using the e-portfolio, the students can develop their CV, and also we encourage students to create their digital identification. So this is my story. So now I'm gonna I'm going to hand over my colleague, Adam. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. We're doing a joint presentation here, but please, if you've got any questions, do put them to us. Stella has really talked us through how we've looked at the theory side of it and how we've adapted that and reimagined it. And we just want to share with you, because a lot of our work was about telling our stories individually as scholars. But I worked in my community last summer in August with some young people. When they were being asked to tell their stories, they were feeling very frustrated that nobody was listening to them about Black Lives Matter and other issues. They're still feeling very frustrated that nobody's listening to them. And I don't know about in your part of the world, but so this is just an
Can you hear?
Yes, the video sound's coming over.
Trends.
This is Myla giving her story.
It's something that needs to keep being pushed.
Mask. I don't want anyone to see who I really am.
I need to protect myself.
Take it off. Let me go. Free to be.
You can't hide a face.
Hides my insecurities.
Skin, our melanin is what stands out.
Brown. Beautiful.
It holds together.
Dark and lovely. Mine to love.
Ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Blaring loudly. Can I trust you? I want to, but you lie.
Lies, greed, propaganda, deceit.
Netflix and chill.
Given the time constraint, I cut this. Let's share presentation again.
We just wanted to show a snippet. That video, Voices of the Young, is called We Exist. It's very interesting to look at that and to hear what the young people were saying and how they were saying it. There's been an awful amount of pushback in the UK about Black Lives Matters in recent months, but it's very important that we listen to their voices. And actually, it was very interesting how they linked that all into culture, music, dance, drama, and things that perhaps some people might not have expected them to do. It's very powerful. Shared that with a number of people. Some English colleagues, English teacher colleagues that I know have used that in the classroom since to stimulate a debate and discussion about issues and about affecting young people. And just anecdotally, there's quite a big group of people on a piece of land just up the road here at the moment, camping out, demonstrating about the government. I went up there this afternoon just to speak to some of the young people there actually about their views. Not that I agree with all of them, but it was quite interesting that they feel very strongly that they need to have a voice in citizenship as we move forward. So anyway, that was one of the practical things we did. In our research approach, which we did mainly do between May and July last year, but we did start it in March, we carried on with a reading group and a group that we'd been doing before the pandemic every fortnight. We wanted to do that. There was a need to do it. Everybody felt that they wanted to communicate, being locked down in their rooms across the world. We had people from all over, from Turkey to Cyprus, and I'll talk to you about the others in a minute. We wanted to call our work Citizenship Amid the COVID-19 Turmoil. We looked at things like hate speech from Waldron. We looked at economic and political populism with writers such as Zembeles, decoloniality with Mignola, and of course the Black Lives Matters canon of work, or the limited amount of work on that that was emerging. In the end, 6 scholars wrote an autobiographical narrative from China, South Korea, the Philippines, the United States, Nepal, and the United Kingdom. Our colleague in Nepal is still locked down in a terrible situation in Kathmandu at the moment. Our colleague from the United States was in Washington, DC at the time of all those demonstrations and so on. So we have a wide range of opinions, but not just from the West, as you can see, from other parts of the world, important parts of the world. And we all decided to do our work in this way, digital reflexive journaling. And that's what we did. So let's just move on to some of the key words which we've come across, and we've touched on those in the work we've done with you just in the last half an hour or so. But I'm not going to dwell on too many of those, except to say that there's a very strong view of the second one about active citizenship. What does that actually mean when you're locked down, can't go out? And compassionate citizenship as well, revisiting that. What do we actually mean by that? And coming out of the pandemic, how do we work to improve on that? So moving on. So we're thinking about reimagining education in relationship to this conference. Digital technology has the potential to be extremely positive. And we met people we wouldn't have met if it hadn't been for digital connections, as Stella was saying. But there are also negative sides to that. And I think that a debate that's been taking place in the UK, I'm sure around the world, is this inclusion versus exclusion, the haves and the have-nots, those that have digital technology to hand and those that don't. And that's played out very strongly in our schools, where we've seen, even in a year, some children who do not have access to that form of technology have dropped back significantly in their reading ages and so on during this pandemic. And it's incumbent upon all countries to make sure that we close that gap and raise the achievement. The structures, we were very interested in the structures of universities, how they operate, but also schools too, and education. And our behaviours, how people are behaving, erratic behaviour, non-erratic, and so on, within this whole context. And the need to be able to speak about things. This was very, very important. The cultures, as I've touched on, different nuances about cultural experience and how that affects, and protocols. I'll just mention this one to you, a small one, but if you're in a seminar and you get up to walk out, how's that perceived by everybody? You probably wouldn't do it, but you can just easily leave a meeting, can't you, on Zoom? And so it's just thinking about those protocols and those ways of working in the future that get the best out of digital technology. So just finishing up. Some of the implications, I think Foucault said, the pandemic can be revelatory, but can it be transformational? And I think our group was really looking at how we can use the pandemic, which is not over by any stretch of the imagination, how it can transform. And looking at education, particularly universities, but also schools, the curriculum. And you saw when Stella was showing the UCL curriculum approach, but how do we look at that in the future? How do we look at the whole thing about examinations and assessment? There's a big debate going on in the UK at the moment about GCSEs, exams at the age of 16. Not happened for 2 years. So are they necessary? Are they needed? And what shape and what form should we be doing that? What does a teacher look like, both in a university and in a school in the future? And what do learners look like with the opportunities that digital technology gives us? So in conclusion, I think we've got one other slide. There are some points there. There's one from Hugh Starkey. There's a second one about education for action and compassion. And finally, you can look at those, but the final one, because I'm conscious of time, is we believe passionately in the education for active and compassionate citizenship can equip young people and everybody with the moral imagination they need to be participatory civic agents and actors as we move out of the pandemic into a future world, whatever that might look like. And I'm mindful that this year, it's only June, more people have died across the world from the pandemic than died in the whole of last year. And we're certainly not out of this by any stretch of the imagination. So we, just returning then, we began to re-look at our stories. We called them vignettes, actually, and we published that in a paper, but also about reflexivity, as Stella's talked about, the debate between cosmopolitanness and national borders, a tension there, the debate between being active, being international, or being local, the power of those different dichotomies and dynamics. So I'm going to leave you there, and thank you very much indeed for listening so far.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. So we will move on the this group discussion. So Adam and I developed several questions for reflection in this session. And I really wonder, I wonder about your personal experience. So could you share your experience if there is a module in your organization or institution that applied autobiographical reflexivity, or what was effective and in what ways did it need to be improved? So there is a 5 question, and then you just type your thought on this interactive board. I'm gonna share the Padlet link here. This is a Padlet link, so you can type your thought, your experience, and I will give a 5 minutes, and we can discuss after 5 minutes.
Some interesting points coming up here.
Yeah, right.
Also, I just wanted to, while people are doing that, just the word vulnerable or vulnerability came up in the chat box. I think that was very important in our work. That came through very strongly about vulnerabilities and allowing people that form of vulnerability, which the pandemic had shown to everybody actually. And we need to be much more aware and understanding of that. Interesting. Yeah. Some of these comments are positive and some of them are certainly not, but it's a range, which is interesting. So we've got about 10 minutes. I think that's right, Bruce. Do we want to draw out some points from these questions? Anybody want to speak to the point they've made or ask for Stella on our comments on it?
Well, I think it's a really important and interesting point, diversity training. Could you share your thought with us?
For the diversity training?
Yeah, diversity training.
Yep, that would be mine. So yes, Bruce, I work for Dell Technologies, and we have a required diversity training, which they're rolling out to the whole company. And this is just this is more than just the actual diversity. We have different terms for it, but it's a in-depth, multi-hour kind of a led discussion. And I was, shocked at people sharing the stories. Now I'm, white Anglo-Saxon, so I just see it through, stories in other people's eyes. But I was shocked at the, I guess, discrimination, or for lack of a better word, that happens within our company. Just, assuming that we hire smart people and everybody should know better, that these things still happen, not just between employees, but between management and even at conferences, to where it's a, one of my colleagues is African American, and she's was at going to a conference, and they go, somebody said, "Oh, you look lost. The waitress conference is over here," and they just made that assumption that she was a waitress, even though she's a technical person. And I was just going, that still happens. Again, since I don't come across this day to day, that it was still a shock that these things still go on.
Oh yes, I so shocked and at the same time sad. So it's really important, the crucial diversity training to understand the different diversity.
I can speak a little more to that too. This is Miranda. I work for another organization besides the Learning Ideas Conference, a nonprofit. And since the pandemic started, and then the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer, we've had multiple DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. And not only that, there's been safe spaces led by staff members. So there was a safe space meeting for African-American staff members to just sort of have open discussion about things that they might be experiencing in the workplace. And we've done that. And there's also been, staff-led discussions by LGBTQ staff members, also safe spaces. There's also been ally spaces to talk about allyship and how to be a better ally. So they've really, this nonprofit that I work for has really done a lot in that specific area. And they also made available a course for all staff members, a DE&I course through a university, available to take if you wanted to take it as well. So it really stepped up specifically in that area.
All right.
It's good to hear. And I mean, in that space that has been created, it's important that it is not just filled, but people have the opportunity to voice their concerns, their opinions, also from that vulnerable side of things, and perhaps saying things that hitherto they haven't felt able to say. I think that's quite important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing those two perspectives.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I'm looking at this this opinion. So it means a pandemic forced the employee to change, to develop and deliver the online module, online session now at the moment, 100%, right? Am I right?
Yeah, this is Bruce. That's us. Yeah, that's us again. We were trying to, slowly make the move because it's easier and cheaper to deliver content online, and then also whether it's virtual instructor led or just like an e-learning or some type of mixed modes.
Then did your organization, your company hire the more instructional designer or the programmer?
No, we just had to do a little bit of our delivery staff was already trained to do both instructor led, in person and virtual. So we had to just brush up on the virtual skills a little bit. And there's some pushback to the people who like to travel and like to do the in person. And we're like, great, we'll hopefully get back to that someday. But no, right now it's pretty much 100% virtual.
Yeah.
And of course, there are many positives in that. Even in our small group, we were, as I said earlier, we were meeting with people from all over the world, which would have been impossible physically even before the pandemic. But it's looking at those opportunities. Somewhere I put the phrase hybrid learning. People are talking about that, aren't they? There's a pretty dreadful phrase they're using in English schools called the blended curriculum. But it's that sense about how we're looking forward and how teachers were teaching young people through, well, best part of a year, actually. But how does that play out as we move into the future? I think it's very interesting to see the positives as well as the downsides of all of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Adam's thought, because now I'm teaching MA students, the migrant and minority migrant refugee module. Before I start my module, then I'm a little bit concerned how I encourage students to engage all activity through on the Moodle, the online platform. But surprisingly, a lot of students voluntarily engage in all activity, and they really actively submit their opinion. Actually, in this Padlet, I always use this Padlet in my module to help to facilitate the student to type their idea, to share their think and thought.
Well, I'm sure that's happened before, but I think that what we're saying is that if you make that essential part of your work with whether it be young people or whether it be university students or whoever, to allow a space for people to tell their stories, not only is it get the stories out there, which I think is very, very important, but it gives people confidence, and it gives people confidence to contribute in a wider way. We found in organisations in general. And the outcomes can be much better as a result of that.
Yeah. And shall we move on to the next question? Well, yeah, I 100% with you. The collaborative learning and social learning is quite challenging and always a second thought. Could you share your thought while you type this? What's the most challenging part of collaborative learning?
That might have been me.
Yeah.
I am just such a tactile person. I like to be in person. So being online and having a screen and not being able to really, if there's a question or if I'm confused on something, having someone there instead of, it almost feels like more of a nuisance to be online and ask questions than in person. It just feels harder for me personally.
All right.
No, that's not easy. And I mean, I was sort of making a bit of a side earlier when I was talking about the protocols, but I think there is something in that, actually, the way in which you can use power of digital technology, given what you've just said there, it's impersonal, to make sure that in some ways you're allowing people some space and understanding, confidence. There's still a lot of people that are not very confident about technology, young people as well, and will shy away from using it. So you're right, in that sense, it's an obstacle, but it can be overcome, I'm sure.
Yes.
Joanne, thank you for sharing your thought and your experience. And also, I'd like to share my personal experience with my students, because normally in in-person session, many Asian students tend to shy, never share any idea in person the session. However, in online session, they really engage actively and passionately and send message to me, and also they share their idea, their thought on interactive board. That's why I try to look the positive aspect of online collaborative learning.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and then this.
We got 2 minutes left.
2 minutes left. One of the things we did want to do just before we finish is we just wanted to go to our reference list.
Okay.
I don't know whether we're able to do that.
I will share this.
Stella's in charge of all the slides up. Those are some of the questions. And these were some of the references we used. That will be shared with you. But we did just want to give a shout out to, we just produced a paper actually, which was published in Perspectives in Education this year on our work, which we believe is quite innovative and is for the moment and can help us think about creative ways in which we can use learning ideas now, but also in the future. So we both like to thank you very much for everybody for your attendance. Do stay in touch. Those are our emails. We'll be dipping in and out of the conference over the next couple of days. And I'd like personally to thank you very much. And I'd like to just pass back to Stella.
Thank you so much for listening our presentation. And if you want to ask us, and please feel free to contact us. We are here. Twitter and Facebook. You can find me. Thank you so much, and stay well, sane, take good care.
Thank you, Adam and Stella. That was great. That's very interesting. It's fun to take more of a, educational approach versus just a statistical and mathematical and scientific, just the science aspect. That's interesting.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Good. We'll keep in touch.
Yes, keep in touch.
Yep, definitely. Thank you so much. And everyone have a good rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you so much for Bruce and Miranda. Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll see you soon. Bye.
See you.
Bye.